And I saw a state representative knocking on the door of the governor, and she was arrested. Meanwhile, we saw a violent insurrectionist attack on the United States Capitol, and police officers died in that case. And I want to know what makes her actions so dangerous. It is that big lie that is the fuel for these terrible voter suppression laws that we see coming out of the state of Georgia. We have to push hard against the big lie and make sure that we secure the democracy for all of our citizens.
Georgia.
That was U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock from the state of Georgia speaking on the incident involving Georgia State Representative Park Cannon, who was arrested Thursday for knocking on the door of Georgia Governor Kemp. She was wanting to have the signing of the controversial voter restriction law, Senate Bill 202. She wanted that to be publicly signed as opposed to in private. And as you know from listening to the show, last week's episode was about the abstract racism that is associated with these restrictive voter ID laws. This is Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We talk a lot about a lot of things in this show. While we chew the gum, and just like every show, we always have
something for your mind, something for your mind, something for your mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요.
Something for your
As the saying goes, once again, it's on. Welcome back to this edition of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. I'm your host, Protocol. As always, please feel free to email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com if you have comments or questions about any of the episodes from season 1 or 2, or if you have a topic you'd like to hear us discuss, or if you'd like to be a guest. I'll be glad to have you. During the intro, did I give the email address? letschewthegum@gmail.com. During the intro, you were hearing from U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock as he described and talked about the arrest of Georgia State Representative Park Cannon. She was arrested for while she was knocking on the door in the State House the door of Governor Kemp of Georgia. She was asking that the controversial bill, SB 202, was signed in public as opposed to in private. This controversial bill is the latest in a string of voter ID laws, voter suppression laws. This one happens to be a voter ID law. And if you listen to last week's episode, I had mentioned that these voter ID laws are abstract racism. And I'm happy to say I did receive a few comments via social media and email regarding how can these laws be racist. And, the whole idea of abstract racism is that racism or race is not going to be revealed. It's not going to be blatant. It's going to be in the abstract. You heard from Lee Atwater a comment that he made about abstract racism on last week's episode. The idea here is that these types of laws that are implemented disproportionately affect individual groups. In this case, poor people, which more than likely will be people of color, in this case in Georgia. So we'll look a little bit deeper into the statistics behind those that are affected. But before we do so, let me tell you, and you may not need statistics to show it, but let me tell you about these laws. Today's episode, by the way, was going to be, this is the last episode that'll air for Women's History Month, and it was going to be a recap of women's history. But with the arrest of State Representative Park Cannon, this is now a part of women's history. As again, she was handcuffed and dragged out of the state capitol. When I say dragged, she wasn't dragged on the ground, but she was forcibly removed. Since then has been released, and I'm sure there's some follow-up there. But again, this law affects not only women of color in Georgia, but women in general, as 53% of the voters in Georgia are women. And of the black voters in Georgia, 56% of those are women. So going down the line, here are some of the provisions of this law. This law will require that if you want an absentee ballot, that you must submit a copy of an ID with the ballot, absentee ballot application, as well as a copy of the ID when you submit the actual ballot. This law criminalizes giving food or water to voters while they stand in line. And we saw from the last election that those places where there were 7 and 8 hour lines, first of all, that's ridiculous. But those are intentionally done to dissuade people from voting. You don't have all day to vote. Some folks, as a young lady in a meeting I was in last week mentioned, if she had to go to vote on her lunch break, you would think an half hour, an hour might be sufficient enough. But in these cases, no, it takes a whole work day. So it eliminates quite a few people in that regard. This law also gives the state legislature really the complete oversight, as it disempowers, is that a word? Disempowers the county election boards. The state legislature can deem and overrule county election boards in terms of who is able to vote and whose votes count. It also basically eliminates the power of the Secretary of State. You'll remember in the last election that the Secretary of State of Georgia repeatedly informed former President Trump that there was no election fraud happening in the state. Well, now this law provides that the legislature will appoint someone in that position to oversee these matters. Not only that, but the state legislature already appoints 2 members to the state elections board. So now they'll have 3 of the 5, which gives them a majority. So again, they would be taking control pretty much over the elections. This is so key as to why the proposed bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, is important, because of the fact that after the Civil War, many southern states denied the rights to vote of African Americans, right? Whether it was poll taxes or grandfather clauses, or again, silly means of counting how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, or literacy tests, etc. Well, the Voting Rights Act protected those voters because it mandated that states that had any type of discrepancy in terms of a lack of turnout for particular voters, black voters in particular, if any of those things happened, the federal government could, intervene. Well, that was stricken down. The Article 5 of that Voting Rights Act was stricken down in 2013 because it said that these states were no longer engaging in those types of practices. And again, as you see, as soon as that law was stricken down by the Supreme Court in the Shelby County versus Holder case, that states went immediately to voter ID laws or tactics to make it more difficult for people of color and poor people to vote. Stacey Abrams called this desperation and cowardice. And I would tend to agree. I would tend to agree with that statement. And I'll agree with that because if you look at the percentages of individuals who voted and the increase in voters from 2016 to 2020, the largest percentage jump was among black voters. They had a 25% total increase, followed by Latino voters with an 18% increase, white voters 18% increase. Those that didn't declare a racial category, unknown 14%, Asian 12%, other 11%, Native American 2%. So all of these groups had an increase in the voter registration, and now these new laws are coming into effect to counteract that. So it is desperation. One official in Georgia called the black voter turnout increase it's rigging the election or stealing the election, and that just is unconscionable to think that. Senate Bill 68 that just passed, another bill, Senate Bill 68, it bans drop boxes for absentee ballots. You can't just drop it in the box anymore. So let's talk about this voter ID. You've heard me say before, I'm not against folks having to have an ID for voting, but it should be provided by the government, because otherwise it's a tax. It's a voting tax. It's a poll tax. Let's call it what it is, a poll tax. You're charging people money to vote. And this idea of voter IDs, that again, I say it's abstract racism because it disproportionately affects people of color, poor people. You have to decide when you have to decide between, 5 folks in the home getting IDs at $40 a pop versus, food or groceries or part of your rent or rent, you're going to probably not be able to choose voting. When you have to get a copy, right? You're assuming that everyone has access to a copy machine to get a copy of their ID. Everyone, if they don't have access to a copy machine at home or printer, they have to go and get a copy, 2 copies. And those that have the means, before you think that it's ridiculous, just consider that that's not possible for everybody. It's not affordable for everybody. That might be dinner that particular day, or depending on how many people are in the household that have to have a copy. Or if you're in a rural area and you have to travel, that's gas that you may not even have time to be able to do that because of work. So there are ways to improve and secure our voting process without, burdening people with taxes such as this. As a matter of fact, the Republican Party just prior to the last election was touting Georgia as a model for the factors related to, they had protections against fraud. There was not sufficient evidence that fraud was happening. They were happy with the absentee ballot process there in Georgia. And now, all of a sudden, after this turnout increased amongst people of color especially, now all these laws it's rigging the election. All these provisions are rigging the election or stealing the election. Right. So it's terrible. Bruce C.T. Wright, I don't know him personally. He's the managing editor of News One. Did quite a bit of reporting. A lot of the information I was discussing, I was looking at one of his articles that he put out there. Something else. It eliminates automatic voter registration. So you can't automatically be registered, maybe at the post office or at the Department of Motor Vehicles, etc. So it's really making it difficult. Anoa Changa, from a journalist and retired attorney, also reported on some other bills that are potentially harming. Senate Bill 69 in Georgia will revoke automatic registration. As I said, it would prohibit nonprofits from mailing absentee ballots out to people. It would prohibit new residents in Georgia from voting in runoff elections. It would prevent county boards from using grant funds to improve election administration. And that was so key during last year with COVID, with county election boards being able to administer or change or improve the election process by spending money to provide alternative mechanisms or alternative means for people to vote. So this bill is law now. It's controversial. And as I said, the Georgia State Representative Park Cannon was arrested because she was trying to get at least the governor to sign that law in public as opposed to privately behind doors. I'm going to take a quick break and discuss more about this when we come back. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z. I'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Yeah, I just wanna focus on my vote. I ain't got no time, I gotta work. Yeah, rent is coming up, I need this cash. Plus I got a couple terminations in my past, yeah. Gotta ask my bosses for a day off. But if I do, I know I might get laid off. I just wanna focus on my vote. I just wanna focus on my vote, yeah.
It's been almost 1 year since the 2020 graduates found out that they would not be having a traditional graduation and walking the stage. And it's been 1 year that Instagrad 2020 celebrated them for the entire year with prizes, games, and lots of fun. I'm happy to say that the Instagrad 2020 documentary will be released soon for all those 2020 graduates and for you and yours to watch. Be sure to tune in. You can see more at instagrad2020.net. Email instagrad2020@gmail.com. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram at Instagrad2020. Thank you. Welcome back, and thank you to listening to the sponsorship provided by Instagrad 2020. These voter ID laws, as you can see and hopefully see, they are detrimental. It is a direct threat to our democracy, and if something's not done about it, you can best believe that they're coming after you. As I said before, as it relates to Women's History Month, 56% of black voters in Georgia are women. 53% of the voters in Georgia overall are women. And we know that women are now, and have been for some time, the majority of the population in the United States. So if you don't think these votes, these voter IDs matter, they will. It's just a matter of time. So you need to speak up about the inequities that are blatant in these laws. Research and do your homework and find out why. Again, it sounds great on the surface, voter ID laws. I'm all for having an ID. But again, people, that's a tax. I'm all for that, but it's a tax if you're going to institute these types of laws, and not everyone can afford it. So show some sympathy. And if you are truly patriotic, if you are truly about having a secure democracy, then you'll support the effort to undo, the effort to stop these voter ID laws from happening. So wherever you are, call your representatives, your senators, be engaged, and let your voice be heard on the matter. And if you disagree, that is your right to also disagree. But mark my words, this is terrible. The fact that Park Cannon was arrested for standing up to protest that is terrible. It's terrible. Again, I don't know what threat she was posing, if any at all. There's sure to be a lot of follow up to that, as the attorney has already been retained for that situation. She broke no laws that I'm aware of. She is a sitting state legislator knocking on the governor's door to bring attention to this law that is designed to eliminate so many people from the rolls. Again, if it doesn't affect you, it affects someone very close to you. And again, think about this. As more people are removed from the voting logs, from the voting rolls, they'll come for you. Who's going to vote for you? So let that sink in. This is not isolated to Georgia, although I've been talking a lot about Georgia. This isn't isolated just in Georgia. There's several states. It's not isolated in the South. There are many in the North. Several states are trying to implement this. Again, that's why the need for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is urgent, for it to be voted on and passed. We need to make sure it gets out of committee and doesn't die in committee, because that would strengthen the resolve of the federal government to intervene when states try to enact laws such as this. Please, I urge you, do your research. This is your country too. I want to give a shout out again to all the women all around the world who continue to make strides and contributions. I want to give a acknowledgement to the fact that we are not to the point where we need to be in terms of equity and rights for women. So keep pressing, keep pushing. We will surely get there. You've been listening to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. Feel free to email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com for show topics. I'm going to cut this a little bit short today, as I'm going to now go and advocate on behalf of women. I guess that makes it advocating for all, because without women, there wouldn't be men. We'll see you next time. Remember, we always have.
Something for your